Her quiet Saturday morning coffee was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Karen, the arrogant HOA board member, stood at the door, ready to accuse her of poorly trimmed bushes. Before she could finish, the threat of calling the police hung in the air. But here's the twist. Sara isn't just a neighbor. She's the district judge. What happens next? This isn't about bushes. Things are about to get real. It was a peaceful Saturday afternoon when Sara Thompson, a local judge in her mid-30s, was enjoying her coffee at home in Arlington. The sun poured through the windows of her neat, two-story house, casting a warm glow over the living room. For Sara, this was the kind of quiet moment she treasured, the calm before the storm of a busy work week. But then the doorbell rang, and her tranquility shattered. Standing there was Karen Mitchell, a sharp-eyed, fastidious member of their homeowners association, HOA, her blonde bob reflecting the sunlight. Her eyes zeroed in on the garden hedge that Sara had trimmed a little too much for her liking. "You're violating HOA rules, Sara." Karen's voice was clipped, accusatory, the words almost a shout. Her finger pointed directly at the hedge, like it was some criminal act. Sara paused, blinking in surprise. Of all the things to be confronted about, a garden? She took a slow breath, collecting herself before answering. "I don't think this is any of your concern, Karen," she said, her tone measured, controlled, but firm. Karen's eyes narrowed, her lips twisting into a sneer. "You've been warned before. I'll call the police." The threat was so absurd that for a moment Sara couldn't help but stare, dumbfounded. Karen had always been the one to stir trouble in the neighborhood, finding petty issues with everyone. Now she was going so far as to bring the police into a trivial dispute over a garden hedge? But Sara knew something Karen didn't. She wasn't just a resident in the neighborhood. She wasn't just a judge in the county courthouse. Sara Thompson was the district judge. The woman Karen was trying to intimidate was used to handling far more serious matters in the courtroom. The thought of being cowed by petty HOA rules felt almost laughable. Karen stood on the porch, her phone already pressed to her ear, reporting Sara's alleged violation with a sense of triumph. "You're going to regret this, Karen," Sara muttered under her breath, stepping back inside and shutting the door with a soft click. As she locked it, her fingers lingered on the cold metal, the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. It wasn't about the hedge anymore. It was about Karen, who had once again managed to turn a trivial matter into something personal. This wasn't just about a rule being broken. It was about Karen trying to impose her will on Sara out of spite, to make her life more difficult. Sara's anger flared. The audacity of it. A small part of her wanted to let it go, but the other part knew that if she did, Karen would never stop. This wasn't a battle she could let slide. Moments later, the sound of tires against asphalt reached her ears. Sara stepped onto the porch, her jaw set, preparing herself for the inevitable confrontation. A police car rolled slowly into the cul-de-sac, its lights flashing softly, casting long shadows across the quiet street. The officer who stepped out was unfamiliar, his face youthful and his expression a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. Officer Jameson was new to the area, unfamiliar with the dynamics of the neighborhood. He glanced at Karen, who was now pointing at the hedge as though it were the most heinous crime imaginable. Sara couldn't help but shake her head at the absurdity of it all. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the officer said, his voice apologetic, as if he genuinely wanted to defuse the situation. "But I have to follow up on this complaint." Sara's gaze hardened. "Let's get one thing straight," she said, her tone cold, every word measured. "You don't get to come here and harass me based on someone's personal vendetta. I'm the county judge. You don't have the authority to be here without a legitimate reason." The officer paused, his eyes widening as the realization hit him. He hadn't known who he was dealing with. Karen's smug grin faltered, her confidence slipping. The balance of power had shifted, and she didn't know how to react. As the officer turned to leave, Karen's glare burned into Sara, venom lacing her every word. "This isn't over, Sara. You think you can hide behind your job?" she sneered, her voice dripping with spite. "You'll see what happens when I report this to the HOA board." Sara's fists clenched at her sides. How dare Karen try to use her own position to intimidate her? But this was no longer just a petty dispute about a hedge. It had escalated into something far more personal. Karen had crossed a line, and Sara wasn't about to let her get away with it. The quiet fury that had been simmering inside her now boiled over, settling into a sharp resolve. She picked up her phone, dialing the numbers of a few trusted colleagues. They had to be made aware of Karen's harassment. She spoke through gritted teeth, her words deliberate, cold. "It's time to put this to an end." She hung up, a plan already beginning to form in her mind. A strategy, both legal and personal, to ensure Karen's reign of petty torment would end once and for all. The next day, Sara walked into the HOA meeting, feeling the weight of the room shift the moment she entered. The tension was palpable. Heads turned as every eye fell on her. The murmur of hushed conversations stopped abruptly, and a quick glance at Karen revealed the unmistakable color draining from her face. The smug confidence that had defined her just the day before was now replaced with a flicker of fear. Sara stood tall, her posture commanding the room's full attention. The silence was thick, broken only by the sharpness of Sara's voice as she addressed Karen. "Karen, I've had enough of your baseless accusations. It's time the board took a serious look at your behavior," Sara declared, her words slicing through the quiet. Her voice didn't waver. It cut with precision, authority, and a growing sense of finality. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, the air thick with the realization that Sara was no longer a passive target in this game. This wasn't a simple HOA complaint anymore. It was a showdown, and Sara had come prepared. The tables had turned. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Karen tried every trick in the book to intimidate Sara, from filing false reports to digging up irrelevant complaints. But Sara fought back with legal precision, using her position to expose Karen's history of harassment. Finally, the HOA held a special meeting. This time, Sara wasn't just a judge. She was a force to be reckoned with. Karen's manipulative tactics crumbled under the weight of evidence. The board voted unanimously to remove Karen from her position, and the neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief. Sara, standing in the front of the room, couldn't hide her satisfaction. She turned to Karen one last time. "This is the consequence of abusing power," Sara said, her voice calm but final. "You're not above the law." As Karen was escorted out, Sara felt a sense of triumph. The community had been restored to a sense of fairness, and she had done what was right. Sara looked out the window as the sun set, the peaceful view of her garden no longer interrupted by an unwanted threat. For the first time in weeks, she could finally relax.